Hi everyone, my name is Naila. As a revert, the most common question I receive is why did you choose Islam? Many people assume it was emotional, blind, or even brainwashed decision. So now I want you to stay with me. I'm going to walk you step by step from my absolute atheism through science, skepticism, evolution, and major religions, all the way to why I ended up in Islam. So I want to say something very carefully before I start. This is my personal conclusion. You may disagree, it's completely fine. I didn't convert because I was emotional. I didn't wake up one day scared of death, and I didn't suddenly stop believing in science. I was born into Christianity, but later I became atheist. Not in a rebellious way, in a logical way. My position was simple. If there is no evidence of God, I won't believe in God. And honestly, that felt intellectually clean. But over time, something shifted. Not because I found a religious argument, but because I started asking questions that science itself doesn't answer. Not contradict, just doesn't answer. So let's start easy. The beginning problem. Let's start with the universe. Modern cosmology tells us the universe began. Not just stars, not just galaxies. Time itself began. And if time began, then asking what happened before time becomes meaningless inside physics. Because before requires time. That's fine. But here is what I started thinking. If time, space, and matter began, then whatever causes them can't be inside time, space, or matter. Well, that's not religion. That's logic. So the science describes processes inside the universe. It does not explain why the universe exists instead of nothing. And nothing is not unstable. Nothing is nothing. Okay, some people may say universe could come from quantum fluctuations, but quantum fields are not nothing. They are something with structure, laws, and mathematical consistency. So the question remains, why do laws exist? Why does mathematics apply? Why is there something rather than nothing? Atheism doesn't answer that. It just says we don't know, which is fair. But we don't know doesn't mean there is definitely no cause. So by definition, if there was a cause, it would have to be outside time, outside space, not material, and extremely powerful. And at that point, you're describing something that starts sounding less like random matter and more like something metaphysical. Okay, that didn't make me religious, but it made me less certain that there is definitely nothing. Then there is consciousness. Well, this one bothers me more. We understand neurons, we understand brain chemistry, we can map electrical activity. But explaining brain activity is not the same as explaining subjective experience. Why does electrical activity feel like something? Why is there an eye behind my eyes? Why is there awareness at all? If humans were purely survival machines shaped by evolution, the consciousness should be just efficiency. But it's not just processing, it's experience. There is something like to be me. And science still cannot explain why matter arranged in a certain way produce awareness. It can correlate brain states with experience, but it cannot explain why experience exists. Again, not anti-science. It's just acknowledging the limits of current explanation. And when I realized that, the certainty cracked a little, because materialism assumes everything is physical. But consciousness is one thing we know exists more directly than matter. I can doubt the universe, but I cannot doubt that I am experiencing something. And that inversion is strange. But let's go a little bit deeper when it comes to religions. The afterlife argument and why the copying explanation failed with me. People often claim that religions exist because humans fear death. Yeah, that sounds logical at first. But I started questioning that too. Fear of death is evolutionarily useful. It keeps you alive. If you truly believed death is just a gateway to something better, that could potentially reduce the survival drive. So why would evolution allow humans to develop a deep, persistent longing for transcendence? And I'm not talking about I don't want to die. I'm talking about the universal human obsession with meaning, the persistent intuition that there is something more, and the discomfort with non-existence. If we are purely survival-driven organisms, why are we the only species deeply disturbed by the concept of non-existence? Why are we the only species building metaphysical frameworks across civilizations? Some say it's just pattern recognition gone too far. Maybe, but then another thought hit me. Evolution shapes traits that enhance survival. So why would it allow widespread psychological tendency that has no grounding in reality? We evolved hunger because food exists. We evolved thirst because water exists. We evolved desire because reproduction exists. So what is this longing for afterlife corresponding to? Maybe nothing, but dismissing it as it's just copying felt intellectually lazy, especially when the longing appears across cultures, civilizations, through whole history, through cultures isolated from each other. That deserves analysis, not mockery. So for me, the shift was not emotional. I didn't wake up saying, God exists. I woke up saying, my certainty that there is nothing is no longer rational. And that's a huge difference. Atheism, for me, was absolute confidence in absence. But logically, absence of evidence in metaphysical questions is not evidence of absence, especially when the universe appears with no explanation of cause, consciousness is unexplained, objective morals intuition persist, human longing for meaning is universal. None of these prove God, but taken together, they make strict materialism less obvious. And once strict materialism is not so obvious, alternative explanations become intellectually permissible, not mandatory, permissible. And that's where I landed at this point. So at this point, what changed in me? I didn't abandon skepticism. I redirected it. Instead of only questioning religion, I started questioning atheism too. Why I was so certain that reality is only physical. Why I was assuming that science can measure everything. Listen, science is a method. It is not a worldview. It studies what is measurable. It cannot measure the metaphysical by definition. So expecting science to disprove something beyond physics is like expecting a metal detector to find colors. The wrong tool. So when I realized that, something softened, not into blind belief, but into intellectual humility. So once I admitted something very uncomfortable to my atheist mind, that the creator is at least philosophically possible, much harder question appeared. If there is a creator, which religion, if any, actually represent the truth? Because there are over 4,000 religions around the world. 4,000. And obviously they cannot be correct in their claims all at once. So first thing I realized was this. It's literally impossible for one human being deeply study 4,000 religions. If I try to fully analyze each one, its scripture, philosophy, historical transmissions, internal consistency, theological claims, I would die before finishing research. So I needed a rational filtering system, not emotional, not cultural, logical. So here is the first filter I applied. I started with the largest religions in the world. Not because majority equals truth, that would be a fallacy, but because survival at this scale over centuries is statistically significant. Today the largest religions are Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, and Buddhism. Now here is the logical reasoning of this filter. If a religious system survived for over 1,000 years, was analyzed by billions of minds, produced philosophers, scientists, mathematics, skeptics, critics, was attacked, debated, translated, and still persists globally, then it deserves investigation. Because statistically it becomes increasingly unlikely that every intelligent person across centuries simply missed the obvious contradictions. Let's be clear, I'm not saying majority equals truth. I'm saying scale over time increases the probability that the system has at least intellectual durability. If religion had fatal contradictions that are obvious and shallow, it would likely not survive over 1,000, 2,000 years across civilizations, especially when some of its followers were among the greatest minds in history. So logically, instead of spreading my attention to all 4,000 religions, I focused on few that has global scale, have historical depth, have preserved scriptures, have defined theological claims, and that's not bias, that's efficiency. Think about it like this. If you were investigating which philosophical system about reality is the most coherent, would you start with a small isolated belief with 200 followers, or the system that shaped the whole civilizations over centuries, not because size equals truth, but because intellectual competition matters? The larger the religion, the more it has been criticized, debated, translated, compared, attacked, and yet it survived. And that survival itself is data. Not proof, but data. Then the next step was to eliminate what doesn't match the creator hypothesis. Once I narrowed down to major religions, I asked a logical question. If I already believe the creator must be timeless, not material, the cause of existence, necessary rather than optional, then which religions describes God in the way that matches philosophical necessity? Because if religion describes God in a way that contradicts the philosophical attributes required for the first case, that's a problem. So I was not asking which religion feels good. I was asking which one aligns with the metaphysical reasoning that got me here in the first place. So how I concluded if God exists, it must be one. So after I accept the creator is philosophically possible, another question appeared. If there is a creator, could there be more than one? At first, that sounds harmless. Maybe there are multiple gods. Maybe reality is run by a divine team. But when I actually thought about it logically, this idea collapses very quickly. Let me explain why. So what do we mean by God? Before even discussing numbers, we need definition. If we are talking about God in a serious philosophical sense, we are talking about being that is the ultimate cause of reality, necessary, not optional, not depending on anything else, all-powerful and not limited by space or time. And this is not religious language. That's a logical explanation of first cause. And now here's the key. If such a being exists, can there be two or more? So here we have a problem of limitation. Imagine two all-powerful beings, A and B. If A can do absolutely anything and B can do absolutely anything, we have a problem. Let's say A decides the moon will rise at a certain time, but B decides the moon will not rise. Who wins? If A overrides B, then B is not all-powerful. If B overrides A, then A is not all-powerful. And if neither can override the other, then both are limited. In every scenario, at least one is not truly unlimited. And if something is limited, it is not the ultimate God. And then we have another problem, division of power. Well, it doesn't work either. Okay, maybe they divide responsibilities. For example, one controls the sun and one controls the moon. But that creates a different problem. If one controls the sun and the other controls the moon, then each one has domain they cannot control. And that again means both are limited. And the limited being is not God in an ultimate sense. Because a necessary being, a source of all existence, cannot depend on another being to complete its function. And if it does, it's not independent. And if it's not independent, then it's not ultimate. But let's take you even deeper. The necessary being cannot be multiplied. Here is where it gets even more precise. A necessary being is one whose existence is not optional. It cannot fail to exist. It doesn't rely on anything. Now imagine two necessary beings. To distinguish them, there must be something that makes them different. Because if there is no difference between them, they are not two. They are one. But if there is a difference, then one has something the other lacks. And lacking something means limitation. Limitation means dependency. Dependency means not necessary. So you end up with contradiction. You cannot have two unlimited necessary beings. Multiplicity implies differentiation. differentiation implies limitation, and limitation contradicts the absolute divinity, and the order in the universe is proof itself. Now, look at the universe. It operates under unified laws. Gravity doesn't sometimes disagree with electromagnetism. Physics is not a result of competing authorities. There is a single coherent mathematical structure underlying everything, and that coherence strongly suggests a single source of law. If there were multiple authorities, we would expect metaphysical instability, but instead we observe profound unity, one cosmos, one framework of laws, one consistent structure, and unity in effect strongly suggests unity in cause. There is also a principle in philosophy: simplicity wins. If one cause explains reality good enough, then introducing multiple causes adds unnecessary complexity. If one infinite necessary being explains universe and existence, adding a second does not improve explanation, it actually weakens it. Because now you must explain how they coexist, how they coordinate, why they don't conflict, why neither limits the other. So logically, if creator exists, the most coherent model is one. Not 3, not 10, not a council, one. This was my turning point, because once I reasoned that the first cause must be singular, that eliminated entire categories of religions. Immediately. Polytheism stopped making metaphysical sense, not emotionally, logically. The concept of multiple gods sounds mythological when you analyze it through lens of necessity and independence. If something is truly ultimate, there cannot be two ultimates. So there can be only one foundation of existence. I was not choosing monotheism because of tradition. I was directed into it by my observations. So once I reasoned if God exists, it must be one, not divine, not multiple, not shared, that immediately narrowed the field, because most of the religions in the world are not strictly monotheistic. That logically led me into 3 Abrahamic religions: Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. All 3 claim one God, revelation, a historical relationship between God and humanity. So now the question was not, does God exist? It became, which of these monotheistic frameworks makes the most logical and universal sense to me? And I started with Judaism. So why I couldn't accept Judaism? First, I want to be respectful. Judaism is historically the root of Abrahamic religions. It introduced the concept of one God, and philosophically, that's powerful. But here's where I struggled logically. Judaism as religion is fundamentally about ethnic in structure. Its core narrative is that God made a specific deal with a specific people. Now that's internally coherent. But here is my question. If God is universal creator of all humanity, why will his final preserved guidance be primarily directed to only specific people? Judaism does not actively seeking converts like other religions. It does not claim to be universal. It's centered around a chosen nation. From a logical standpoint, I struggled with this. If God is the creator of every human equally, and if God intends to guide the whole humanity, then I would expect the final message to be universally accessible and universally addressed, not ethnically enshrined or restricted. There was also a question about the preservation. The Hebrew Bible is ancient and historically layered. It went through periods of compilations, redactions, transmissions, and that's historically acknowledged. And while that doesn't automatically invalidate it, it does raise the question about textual continuity compared to what I was looking for. Something claiming to be preserved universally. I was not looking for the oldest religion. I was looking for the most logically universal and structurally consistent one. So my conclusion about Judaism. Judaism made historically sense. It makes sense as foundation, but as a universal framework for all humanity, it felt incomplete for me. So after Judaism, the next logical step was Christianity. And I want to say this clearly, Christianity is serious. It has produced some of the greatest minds, philosophers and scientists in the history. It shaped civilizations. It has deep theology, so I did not approach it casually. I approach it with assumption that it survived 2000 years and there must be something strong in it. But I was also coming into it with one conclusion already established. If God exists, he must be one, absolutely one, not divine, not composed, not dependent. So there is where the tension started. My core issue, the Trinity. Christians' central theological claim is the Holy Trinity. One God, three persons, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Now Christians are very clear. They do not believe in three gods. They insist it's one God. So the question is not if Christianity is polytheistic. The question is whether the concept of three distinct persons within one divine essence is philosophically coherent. And this is where my difficulty began. The problem of distinction. If the Father is not the Son, and the Son is not the Spirit, and the Spirit is not the Father, then there must be something what makes them different. Because if there is nothing what makes them different, then they are not meaningfully different. But if there are real differences, what differences them? If it's knowledge, will, power, then they are not identical in attributes. And if it's identity only, then we are describing differences and it all becomes unstable. And here was my main issue and struggle. If God is absolutely simple and necessary, he cannot be composed of parts, even conceptual parts, because composition implies dependency. If something has differences and different aspects, those aspects either depend on something to unify them or are fundamentally distinct. And if they are fundamentally distinct, then we are dangerously close to plurality. And if they depend on something to unify them, then that unifying reality is more fundamental than the persons itself. And that contradicts divine necessity. So we are back in problematic I was internally solving in the start of research. God must be one and simplicity wins. Then there is incarnation. The belief that God became man in the person of Jesus. Now again, I approach this seriously, but philosophically, this raises more issues. If God is timeless, unchanging, not material, independent, then how does eternal becomes temporal? How does infinite enter limitation? How does necessary being experience hunger, fatigue, or death? Christian says divine nature didn't change, only the human nature suffered. But if the person experiencing suffering is divine person, and we have introduced change into divine identity, if the suffering only belongs to human nature, then what exactly God died means? These aren't emotional objections, they are metaphysical tensions. And there was one more point that completely stopped me. Jesus had a human mother. Mary was a human. So logically, if Jesus is fully divine and fully human, and he is born of a human woman, what category is that? Because historically, when divine beings unite with humans, in ancient traditions, for example in Greek mythology, the result is what we call divine human figure, demigod, a being with both divine and human attributes. Now Christianity insists Jesus is not half and half, but fully God and fully man. But here was my issue. If one side of his existence is eternal, uncreated, necessary, and the other side is born, biological, developing, dependent, then we're describing a being that contains two fundamentally different models of existence. Even if theologians carefully distinguish nature and person, the structure still resembles the Asian category of divine being entering a human nature and biology. And how can God experience death? If you say only the human nature experienced that, then we have now two operational realities inside one identity. And that complexity was exactly what I had already concluded ultimate reality shouldn't have. The salvation in modern Christianity is strongly focused on the sacrifice of this human nature, such as God died for your sins. But in the same time, claim he came back to life like he is alive now, because the God cannot die. So respectfully, that makes that sacrification unnecessary, and it's losing the emotional weight, since it was not real death. How could that be a real sacrifice? The moment divinity enters biology, we move from absolute metaphysical simplicity to a structure. The simplicity of the first cause is compromised. So that's where Christianity lost me. Not because it's irrational, but because it introduces structural complexity that contradicts philosophical simplicity I had already reasoned before. Now, so why Islam? When I reached Islam, I made one rule for myself. I will treat it as a hypothesis, and I will test it the same way as test any serious claim. Is the concept of God coherent? Is the message universal? Is the text preserved and stable? Does it produce workable moral system in life? Does it match human nature realistically? Does it survive criticism without collapsing? And what shocked me is this. Islam didn't feel like religion built around God. It felt like religion built from God. Everything else flows naturally. The idea of God in Islam is philosophically clean. Islam's core is extremely simple. God is one. God is not part of creation. God does not become human. God is not dependent. No partners. Nothing. For me, this matched the first cause logic better than anything else. Because if God is ultimate explanation, the concept of God should be maximally simple, maximally independent, free of internal contradictions. And Islam's God is not a puzzle to solve. It's necessary foundation. And that clarity was my turning point. Islam explains itself as continuity, not novelty. And this mattered a lot to my skeptical brain. Islam doesn't begin saying everything before this was fake. It claims God sent guidance before to many people. People preserved some, altered some, changed some, forgot some, and Islam came as a final correction and confirmation. Even if you don't accept it instantly, that framework is logically strong, because it explains why monotheism appears across history, why religions share moral themes, and why revelations can be corrupted or changed. And the Quran is stable reference. Point A, skeptics hate, is moving targets. Islam's claim is basically the message is preserved and recited as is. Now I'm careful here. Different people debate historical details and manuscripts. But compared to many ancient texts, Islam's entire culture is built around verbatim preservation and mass memorization as norm, not as rare phenomenon. It allows fair test. If the text is stable, you can analyze it. If the text is unstable, you are debating an evolving target. And about the Quran and scientific miracles, I didn't treat them as a proof, but as a signals. This is important. I didn't use scientific facts from Quran like a cheap gotcha. Because skeptics will rightly say some verses are poetic. Some interpretations can be different. People can read modern science into an ancient text. So my approach came not like this proves Islam. But is it strange that a 7th century text repeatedly pushes people into observation and reflection of nature? The Quran constantly invites looking at the sky, life, seas, cycles, measure, thinking, not blind belief. That tone felt unusually compatible with rational mindset. So I kept science as a supporting signal, not a foundation. Islam is also unusually practical. It can actually be lived. A huge reason Islam clicked for me, it's not just beliefs, it's a system. It tells you what to do daily, how to handle anger, how to spend money, how to treat parents, neighbors, how to control ego and your impulses, and how to build discipline when nobody's watching. And the wild part, these practices still functioning 1,400 years later in a modern life. Examples that feels timeless for me are daily prayer, interrupts the ego and routine, build a self-control, fasting. It's about gratitude and empathy, not just diet. Charity forces you to detach from greed and care for society. Prohibition of intoxicants, gambling, interest. Even if it's hard, it reduces social harm at the scale of addiction, debt traps, and broken families. A skeptic can disagree with the rules, but can't deny the system is coherent and behavior shaping. And why Islam is so demonized? I'm trying my best to avoid a conspiracy theories here, but I did notice a pattern. Islam doesn't ask for a private belief. It asks for limits. These limits can make issues to a certain industries that profit from impulse, like alcohol, gambling, parts of industry, film, high interest debt systems, consumerism. So I don't need to believe in a secret plan. It's simpler than that. A worldview teaches millions of people control yourself, lower your gaze, don't drink, don't gamble, don't build life on debt, and modesty matters. Then, of course, some parts of modern culture will frame it as oppressive or backward because it clashes with profit models and dominant values. So my final reason, Islam didn't ask me to turn my brain off. Islam repeatedly challenges arrogance, blind following, hypocrisy, reformative religion, belief with no action. So I became Muslim. This is my way. I want to live like this. So I want to say thank you to everyone who actually stayed till the end of this video. As you can see by the light, I was recording this video for an hour. Start of this video it was a day and now it's night. So I really appreciate it. I tried to do this video as respectful as possible because of course I was speaking about other major religions and it's difficult to handle this topic smart. Just want to say I don't want to start any religious wars. This is just my point of view, how I became Muslim, how I came to Islam. This is my observations and my reasoning. It's completely fine if you disagree. I'm okay with that. That's why we have multiple beliefs. If you are interested in this kind of videos and don't mind my strong accent, I will be very happy if you leave a follow. And one more time, thank you so much for watching this video. And in the last sentence I would like to say is, logically, it's smarter to believe in God than to be atheist. Because if there is nothing and you die as a believer, then there is nothing. But if you die as atheist and there is something, then you have serious issue. have a beautiful day.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
جی خوش آمدید دوستو، امید کرتا ہوں ویڈیو آپ نے پوری دیکھی ہوگی اور آپ کو پسند بھی آئی ہوگی۔ اس دنیا میں جتنے بھی لوگ آباد ہیں جو آپ کو نظر آ رہے ہیں، تو ان میں سے تمام لوگ ایک جیسے نہیں ہوتے، نہ ہی تمام لوگ ایک ہی مذہب کو فالو کرنے والے ہوتے ہیں۔ مثال کے طور پر اگر یہاں پر 8-10 بلین لوگ موجود ہیں تو ان 8 ملین میں سے جو لوگ ہوں گے وہ مختلف مذاہب کے ہوں گے۔ کوئی اسلام کو فالو کر رہا ہوگا، کوئی عیسائیت کو، کوئی یہودیت کو، کوئی ہندوازم، کوئی بدھزم، مختلف قسم کے مذاہب جو ہے نا وہ موجود ہے۔ تو ان میں سے مسئلہ یہ ہے کہ جو لوگ مختلف مذاہب کو فالو کرتے ہیں یا مختلف چیزوں کو فالو کرتے ہیں تو وہ اکثر جو ہے نا راہ راستے جو ہے نا وہ ہٹ جاتے ہیں۔ اگر آپ قرآن مجید کا بغور مطالعہ کریں گے تو قرآن میں اللہ تعالیٰ خود فرماتے ہیں ان الدین عند اللہ الاسلام، اللہ تعالیٰ کے نزدیک جو مذہب ہے وہ اسلام ہے، اور اسلام کے علاوہ کوئی بھی مذہب کو قابل قبول نہیں ہوگا۔ اسلام جو ہے نا وہ ایک ایسا مذہب ہے جو کہ افراد اور تفرید سے خالی ہے، اور اسلام ہی ایسا مذہب ہے جو آپ کو ایک اللہ تعالیٰ کی وحدانیت کا درس دیتا ہے۔ اگر کوئی آپ سے یہ پوچھے کہ اللہ تعالیٰ کی پہچان کیا ہے تو آپ کہہ سکتے ہیں قل هو اللہ احد اللہ الصمد لم یلد ولم یولد ولم یکن لہ کفوا احد۔ اللہ تعالیٰ ایک ہے، اللہ بے نیاز ہے، نہ اس سے کوئی پیدا ہوا نہ وہ کسی سے پیدا ہوا، اور کوئی اس کے برابر نہیں۔ یہ ویڈیو آپ نے دیکھا کس طرح یہ لڑکی جو ہے نا ایک اپنے غلط زندگی سے نکل کر اسلام پر آنے والے بن گئی، اور یہ تو وہ لوگ ہیں جو کہ میڈیا پر آ جاتے ہیں، کیمرے کے سامنے آ جاتے ہیں، جو اپنی سٹوری بیان کرتے ہیں، سبحان اللہ۔ تو بات یہ ہے ایسے کروڑوں لوگ موجود ہیں جو کہ حقیقی اسلام کی طرف آ چکے ہیں لیکن کیمرے کے سامنے کبھی بھی نہیں آئے۔ یہ اس امت کی خاصیت ہے۔ اللہ تعالیٰ قرآن میں فرماتے ہیں کنتم خیر امت اخرجت للناس تأمرون بالمعروف وتنہون عن المنکر وتؤمنون باللہ۔ تم لوگ بہترین امت ہو، تم لوگ بہترین امت ہو، تم لوگوں کو اچائی کا حکم دو گے اور برے کاموں سے روکو گے۔ تو اچائی کا حکم دینا اور برائی سے روکنا، تو یہ سب چیزیں جو ہے نا یہ ایسے ہیں جو کہ اس امت کی خاصیت ہے، اور یہ خاصیت اس لیے ہے کیونکہ رسول اللہ صلی اللہ علیہ وسلم اللہ تعالیٰ کے آخری نبی ہے، ان کے بعد کوئی نبی اس دنیا میں نہیں آئے گا، لہٰذا یہ کام اس امت کے حوالے ہے۔ ایسے ہی دعوت اور تبلیغ کا ایک شعبہ آج کل بہت زیادہ سرگرم ہے، ماشاءاللہ پوری دنیا میں ان کی جماعتیں جاتی ہے، صرف اس مقصد کے لیے تاکہ لوگوں کو اسلام کی طرف بلایا جائے اور لوگ ان کے اخلاق سے متاثر ہو کر اسلام میں داخل ہو۔ تو دوسروں کو دعوت دینے سے پہلے ضروری ہے کہ آپ خود اسلام پر عمل کر رہے ہوں، آپ کے اخلاق ایسے ہو کہ ان کو دیکھ کر غیر مسلم آپ کی طرف آئے۔ غیر مسلم جو ہے نا وہ آپ کے قرآن کو نہیں دیکھتا، آپ کے دین اسلام کو نہیں دیکھتا، بلکہ وہ آپ کے معاملات کو دیکھتا ہے۔ جب آپ ان کے ساتھ لین دین معلومات کرتے ہیں، معاملات کرتے ہیں ان کے ساتھ، اور ان کے ساتھ سفر وغیرہ آپ کا ہوتا ہے، تو وہ اگر آپ کے اخلاق آپ کے نبی کے مطابق ہو تو وہ ضرور آپ سے متاثر ہو کر آپ کی طرف آئے گا۔ تو یہ ویڈیو آپ نے دیکھا، یہ لڑکی جو ہے نا یہ اسلام قبول کرتی ہے، اسلام میں آتی ہے، تو یہ صرف اللہ تعالیٰ کا خاص فضل و کرم ہوتا ہے۔ اس طرح قرآن میں اللہ تعالیٰ فرماتے ہیں مَن يَهْدِهِ اللَّهُ فَلَا مُضِلَّ لَهُ وَمَن يُضْلِلْهُ فَلَا هَادِيَ لَهُ۔ امید کرتا ہوں ویڈیو آپ کو پسند آئی ہوگی۔ اگر ویڈیو آپ کو پسند آئی اس چینل کو سبسکرائب کریں۔ بہت شکریہ۔